She made it home. That is the part that still keeps people up at night. Not the question of where she went, but the cruel precision of how close she came to safety. A door, a lock, a few more seconds, she was there. She crossed the threshold of the life she had built, and then, somewhere between that moment and the next morning's light, she ceased to be findable. Picture it. A quiet street in one of the most expensive zip codes in southern Arizona. The kind of neighborhood where the hedges are always trimmed, the driveways are always clean, and the security systems are always on. It is nearly 10 o'clock at night. The air is cool. The street is still. A car pulls away, and a woman, a grandmother, a woman of faith, a woman whose family adores her, steps through her front door for what investigators now believe may have been the very last time. Here is what makes this case unlike almost anything we have covered on this channel. The cameras saw everything, right up until the moment it mattered. And then they saw nothing. Not a flicker, not a single frame. On a property fitted with motion-activated surveillance, cameras that had been faithfully logging weeks of ordinary life, the recording stops, completely, as if someone reached into the night itself and switched the world off. Federal investigators would later describe what happened to those cameras with a single word, a word so understated it almost hides the weight of what it means. They called it odd. Not malfunction, not coincidence. Odd. And if you have spent any time studying how predators operate, how they select, surveil, and ultimately strike, you know that odd, in the language of federal investigators, is a word that carries enormous gravity. It means we cannot explain this. It means something deliberate happened here that we have not yet been able to prove. More than 6 weeks after this woman vanished, a man who works in her neighborhood, who knows her street the way most of us know our own kitchens, went to a journalist, not to investigators, to a journalist. Because in all the weeks that had passed, not one detective, not one FBI agent, not one member of the Joint Task Force that was supposedly working this case had ever knocked on his door. He had eyes. He had been there. He had seen things, ordinary things, things he did not yet know were extraordinary. And nobody had asked him what they were. What you are about to see is not a recap. It is not a rumor dressed up as analysis. It is an investigation into a gap in the official investigation, a gap in the media coverage, and a gap that, if it is not closed soon, could mean the difference between justice and silence for a family that has already endured more than any family should. We are going to walk you through every layer of this, the forensic evidence, the surveillance blind spots, the witness who almost wasn't found, and the disturbing question at the center of it all. Was the person who took her someone she had never spoken a single word to, and yet someone who knew more about her daily life than most of her closest neighbors? Stay with us, because nothing about this case is what it first appears to be. If this is the first time you have found yourself on this channel, welcome. You did not land here by accident. Something about this case pulled you in. Maybe it was the headline. Maybe it was a share from someone whose instincts you trust. Maybe it was a quiet night and a story that refused to let you scroll past it. Whatever brought you here, we are glad you are here. This channel exists because too many cases fall into silence, because the news cycle moves on long before families get answers, because justice, real, lasting, documented justice, requires people who refuse to look away. If that is the kind of community you want to be part of, hit the subscribe button right now. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to the work we do here. And before we go any further, drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We have viewers tuning in from across the globe, and every single one of you adds something to this investigation simply by being present, paying attention, and passing this on. Now, let us get into the case. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27, 1942 in Fort Wright, Kentucky, a small community just across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. She was raised in a faith-centered household where church life and family were the anchors of daily existence. She attended Notre Dame Academy, an all-girls Catholic high school in northern Kentucky, before enrolling at the University of Kentucky, where she contributed to the student newspaper, the Kentucky Colonel, working as a society editor and staff member while covering Greek life on campus. It was at the University of Kentucky that she met Charles Errol Guthrie on a blind date at a basketball game. Savannah has told the story many times on television. Nancy looked at him walking up to the door of her sorority and said quietly, "That is the man I am going to marry." She was right. They married on December 28, 1963. Charles was a mining engineer, and his career took them far from Kentucky. The couple eventually relocated to Melbourne, Australia, where they settled in the suburb of Beaumaris. Savannah was born there on December 27, 1971. 2 years later, in 1973, the family moved to Tucson, Arizona, settling into a burnt adobe home in the Catalina foothills near Campbell Avenue and Skyline Drive. That neighborhood, those streets, that desert landscape, became the permanent center of Nancy's world. She never left. Everything changed on June 10, 1988. Charles suffered a fatal heart attack while on a work trip to Hermosillo in the Mexican state of Sonora. He was 49 years old. Nancy was 46. Savannah was 16 and about to start her senior year of high school. The family rearranged itself overnight from 5 people to 4, and Nancy held them together through all of it. She set aside her grief, in Savannah's words, to make sure the children could move forward. In the years that followed, she took a position as a clerk in the University of Arizona's Public Affairs Department. She worked there from 1990 to 2007. That job did more than provide income. It enabled all 3 of her children to attend university at a discounted tuition rate, a practical act of investment in their futures that defined the way she approached hardship, not with self-pity, but with forward motion. Her 3 children are Cameron, Annie, and Savannah, in order of birth. Cameron is the eldest. He served 26 years as an F-16 pilot with the Vermont Air National Guard's Green Mountain Boys, retiring from military flying in 2018 as a colonel. Savannah posted a video of his final flight with the words, "I have never been more proud of my big brother. He is the pride of our family and one of this country's finest." Annie is the middle child, a poet, a jeweler, and a creative writing instructor at the University of Arizona Poetry Center. Her 2015 poetry collection, The Good Dark, was published by Tupelo Press. She runs a commission-only jewelry business from a studio in Tucson and has been published in multiple literary journals. Savannah is the youngest, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show since 2012, one of the most recognized journalists in the United States. Annie and Savannah both chose universities close to home after their father died. They had what Savannah described as a spoken or unspoken pact that on the weekends, even though they were college girls, one of them would always stay home so that their mother would not be alone. That pact says more about who Nancy was to them than any formal tribute could. Annie is married to Tommaso Cioni, an Italian national who has taught AP biology at Basis Oro Valley School in Tucson for more than 15 years. Tommaso is the last confirmed person to have seen Nancy Guthrie alive. On the night of January 31st, 2026, he drove her home after a family dinner, waited while her garage door opened, and watched it close behind her. Annie told investigators she saw no red flags during that dinner. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt like a goodbye. Savannah's husband is political consultant Michael Feldman, who has maintained a deliberately low public profile throughout the investigation. The family's most recent public statement was signed by all three siblings and their partners, Cameron and Christine, Annie and Tommaso, Savannah and Michael. Now, before this documentary moves forward, there is one official classification that law enforcement applied to Nancy Guthrie from the very beginning, and it needs to be understood clearly because it shapes every investigative decision that followed. The Pima County Sheriff's Department described Nancy Guthrie as a vulnerable adult. That does not mean cognitive impairment. Every account from family members, from her church community, from people who knew her in Tucson consistently confirms the same thing. Nancy was mentally sharp, deeply independent, and fully aware of her surroundings. The classification was based entirely on three physical factors. First, her age and the mobility limitations that come with it. Nancy had difficulty walking on her own, a fact that investigators cited early as one of the signs pointing toward abduction rather than a voluntary disappearance. At 84, she could not simply have walked away unassisted. Second, she relied on daily prescription medication. Her family confirmed she needs that medication to avoid being in severe pain, and that failing to take it over an extended period could prove fatal. That medication was found untouched inside her home the morning after she disappeared. She had not taken it with her, or had not been given the chance to. Third, and this becomes one of the most significant forensic details in the entire investigation, Nancy had a pacemaker, an implanted cardiac device that does not simply monitor the heart. It generates a continuous stream of electronic health data, synced automatically to an application on her iPhone. That device was running through all of January 31st and into the early hours of February 1st. It was recording. At a specific minute, in the darkness of that morning, it stopped syncing. A former U.S. Secret Service official described pacemaker telemetry as an unbiased witness, a data record that cannot be covered, powered off, or tampered with from the outside the way a camera can. What the pacemaker data shows about Nancy's physical condition at that exact moment has not been released publicly, but investigators have it. Nancy was an active member of her church community. She attended a weekly virtual live stream service, the same service she was expected to join on the morning of February 1st. Her absence from it was the first signal that something was wrong. The Catalina Foothills is an affluent, spacious neighborhood north of central Tucson. Homes sit on wide lots behind stone walls and desert landscaping. Residents here are largely private. They travel, they work from home, they hire contractors to maintain their properties. That means the people most physically visible on those streets on any given day are not the homeowners. They are the service workers, the landscapers trimming the hedges, the pool crews, the construction workers on lots under renovation, the delivery drivers. These are the people who see everything. Which camera is where, which driveway is empty every morning, which routines are fixed, and which ones shift. That detail becomes directly relevant later in this documentary. One more thing about Nancy's visibility in the months before she disappeared. A man who works as a gardener in her neighborhood came forward in March 2026 to speak to a journalist. He said that in all the weeks since Nancy vanished, not one investigator had come to speak with him, And when asked when he had last physically seen Nancy at the front of her property, he said somewhere between 8 months and a year. He could not be more precise than that. He simply had not seen her in close to a year. That sits quietly at the edge of this story, without a confirmed explanation. What is confirmed is that a person who worked regularly on her street, who would have had natural opportunity to notice her, had not laid eyes on her in close to a year before she disappeared. What happened to Nancy on the night she disappeared is documented in timestamps. The sequence of those timestamps tells a story the cameras almost could not, and in some critical moments, could not at all. January 31st, 2026 was a Saturday, and it began the way most Saturdays did for Nancy Guthrie. She had plans for a family dinner and game night at Annie and Tommaso's home, a gathering that, by every account, was entirely ordinary. At 5:32 p.m., she left her Catalina Foothills residence by Uber. She did not drive herself. She took a ride to her daughter's home, roughly 10 minutes away by car, arriving at 5:32 p.m. as confirmed by Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos at the February 5th press conference, where he laid out the timeline in precise detail for the first time. The evening at Annie and Tommaso's was normal. Annie later told investigators she noticed no red flags during their time together, no tension, nothing out of place. Nancy was present, she was herself, and when the evening wound down, Tommaso Cioni drove her home. It was a 10-minute journey he knew well. The Cioni home and Nancy's residence sit close together in the same Catalina Foothills neighborhood. At approximately 9:48 p.m., Tommaso pulled into the driveway of Nancy's home. Her garage door opened. She walked inside. Nanos later confirmed at the press conference that Cioni waited, making sure his mother-in-law was safely inside before he drove away. At 9:50 p.m., the garage door closed. Tommaso Cioni is the last known person to have seen Nancy Guthrie alive. That statement became one of the most scrutinized facts in the entire investigation. In early February, journalist Ashley Banfield claimed on her podcast that a law enforcement source had identified Cioni as a prime suspect in the case. The claim spread rapidly. Sheriff Nanos responded publicly and directly. He stated, "To be clear, the Guthrie family, to include all siblings and spouses, has been cleared as possible suspects in this case. The family has been nothing but cooperative and gracious and are victims in this case. To suggest otherwise is not only wrong, it is cruel." That official clearance was later reinforced by a further development. In mid-March, former SWAT team leader Chad Ayers appeared on The Megyn Kelly Show and confirmed that all 4 family members, Savannah Guthrie, her brother Cameron, her sister Annie, and Tommaso Cioni, had passed polygraph tests as part of the investigation. Ayers said the tests were passed convincingly. Law enforcement's position is unambiguous. The family are victims. The investigators did examine Tommaso and Annie's vehicle. Their blue Honda CR-V was impounded by the Pima County Sheriff's Department, most likely, investigators said, to collect DNA evidence, given that it was one of the last places Nancy had been before her disappearance. The car was held for an extended period and examined at an auto mechanic facility while remaining in law enforcement custody. It was not the vehicle of suspects. It was treated as a potential forensic repository. Now, back to the overnight hours of January 31st into February 1st. What the Uber driver saw and heard during that 5:32 p.m. ride was obtained by the FBI. Investigative reporter Dave Mack, who discussed the footage with journalist Nancy Grace, confirmed that investigators interviewed the Uber driver at length and that the driver turned over all video from inside the vehicle. There was nothing notable. It was a regular pickup, a regular fare. Nancy rode to her daughter's house for a family gathering, and the driver had nothing to report. The FBI also obtained what is believed to be the last known footage of Nancy alive from that Uber ride, not from the journey home, but from the trip to Annie's house. According to Mac's reporting on the Crime Stories with Nancy Grace podcast, the footage showed how Nancy was speaking, how she was moving, how she presented in the hours before she disappeared. It has not been released publicly. Investigators found nothing in it that pointed toward external threat or premonition. So by 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, Nancy was inside her home. The garage was closed. The night appeared to be over. What followed over the next 4.5 hours represents the core forensic mystery of this case. At 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, the Nest doorbell camera at Nancy's front entrance disconnected. Nanos explained at the February 5th press conference exactly why this mattered technically. The camera had no active subscription. Without a subscription, Nest cameras do not upload footage to cloud servers automatically. Instead, the device loops. It records over itself. Whatever the camera captured on the night of January 31st was, under normal circumstances, gone. The footage would have been overwritten. That technical fact is the reason the investigation subsequently required an entirely separate and extraordinary effort to recover any recording from that camera at all. At 2:12 a.m., approximately 25 minutes after the doorbell camera disconnected, one of the exterior cameras on the property registered a motion detection event. The system's software classified the movement as a person. No footage was recoverable. The camera had sensed something, but produced no image that could be examined or identified. At 2:28 a.m., the application on Nancy's iPhone that continuously synced with her pacemaker showed a disconnection. The pacemaker stopped communicating with her phone at that exact moment. As discussed in the previous chapter, a former United States Secret Service official has described pacemaker telemetry as an unbiased witness, a physiological data record that operates independently of any human decision to record or not record. Whatever the data captured about Nancy's condition at 2:28 a.m. has not been made public. But investigators have it, and it is the last confirmed data point in the overnight sequence. Then, 9 hours and 28 minutes passed without anyone knowing anything was wrong. Nancy typically spent Sunday mornings watching a virtual church service at a friend's home nearby. It was a weekly routine, consistent and expected. When she did not arrive that Sunday morning, her friends contacted the family. A person close to the family later told CNN that the service was a regular commitment Nancy kept faithfully. Her not appearing was immediately concerning to people who knew her habits. At 11:56 a.m. on February 1st, family members arrived at Nancy's home to check on her. They searched the house. They checked the surrounding property. Nancy was not there. Her phone was on the counter. Her medication, the prescription she needed to manage her pain, the medication her family confirmed could prove fatal if she went without it long enough, was where she had left it the night before. Her wallet, her car keys, every personal item she would need if she had left of her own will, all of it still inside, undisturbed. On the front porch, they found drops of blood. At 12:03 p.m., the family called 911. At 12:15 p.m., Pima County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the residence. What those deputies observed when they walked through that property removed any ambiguity about what had happened. Nanos stated publicly in the days that followed she couldn't walk 50 yards by herself. He did not frame it carefully or with hedging. Nancy Guthrie, at 84, with limited mobility and without her medication, could not have walked away from that house in the middle of the night on her own. The idea was not possible. The evidence inside confirmed it. The blood on the porch was later confirmed by forensic DNA testing to be Nancy's. A law enforcement source told CBS News that blood had also been found inside the house. The Nest doorbell camera at the front of the property, the same camera that had been running without a subscription the night before, had been physically removed from its mounting. During a subsequent search of the property, investigators were observed on drone footage removing additional security cameras from the roof of the pool house. By February 2nd, the case had formally shifted from a search and rescue operation to a criminal investigation. The home was designated a crime scene. Homicide investigators joined the sheriff's deputies already on site, not because Nancy was presumed dead, but because the nature of the evidence required that level of forensic authority and resource. Sheriff Nanos stated publicly, "Investigators believe she was taken from her home against her will, possibly in the middle of the night." He told CBS News directly, "I believe she was abducted, yes. She didn't walk from there. She didn't go willingly." Now the timeline opens into something more complicated, because February 1st was not, as investigators came to understand, the first time someone had been at Nancy Guthrie's front door with intent. Investigators flagged 3 dates in the weeks before February 1st as significant for neighborhood camera footage requests. January 11th, 20 days before the abduction. January 24th, 8 days before, the Saturday immediately prior. And January 31st itself, specifically the window between 9:30 and 11 o'clock in the morning, hours before Nancy even left for the family dinner that evening. Here is the origin of January 11th, and it is important to understand it precisely because it has been misreported in several places. When the FBI worked with Google's technical team to recover footage from Nancy's Nest doorbell camera through back-end residual data, a process the next chapter covers in full, they identified a specific image. The image showed a masked figure on Nancy's front porch. But this figure was not carrying the backpack that the suspect carried on the night of the abduction. Google initially indicated to investigators that this particular image may have been captured on January 11th, 20 days before Nancy disappeared. Google subsequently told authorities that they could not definitively confirm the date or attribute the image to any specific day with certainty. The FBI and Google have not publicly commented further on the metadata. But the Guthrie family's March 21st statement specifically highlighted the late evening of January 11th as one of 3 key dates they were asking the public to search their memories around. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer offered her interpretation directly on social media following that statement. The family's statement points to Porch Guy doing a trial run on January 11th before he abducted Nancy. This tells us how committed he was, such a risky move. If he had been seen on the 11th, maybe Nancy would have never been taken. There is one more detail about the January 11th image that carries its own significance. FBI Director Kash Patel released it publicly as part of the February 10th footage release. That decision reportedly surprised investigators working the case on the ground in Tucson, who had hoped to keep the existence of that prior visit confidential, preserving a specific investigative advantage. The suspect, or suspects, apparently did not know that the prior visit had been captured. Once Patel released the image, that advantage was gone. Then there is January 24th. NewsNation correspondent Brian Enton, who maintained a continuous on-the-ground presence in Tucson throughout the investigation, reported in March that FBI agents had also specifically requested neighborhood camera footage from January 24th, the Saturday before the abduction, 8 days prior. Agents who reviewed footage from a nearby home on that date did not disclose to the neighbors what they were looking for. 3 separate dates, 3 windows investigators consider significant. The pattern they form is not coincidental. It is consistent with what criminologists and former FBI profilers describe as pre-offense reconnaissance, the deliberate, repeated observation of a target's property, routine, and vulnerability before committing to the act itself. Someone visited Nancy Guthrie's front door or her surrounding area more than once before February 1st. They studied the property. They studied the routines. They returned. And on the night that Tommaso Cioni watched the garage door close at 9:50 p.m. and drove away satisfied that his mother-in-law was safely home, someone, or more than one person, was already in motion. The footage from February 1st was not available through standard channels. Recovering it required a technical operation between the FBI and Google that changed the entire direction of what investigators knew. What that footage showed, and what it revealed about the person who stood at Nancy Guthrie's front door in the early morning hours of February 1st, is what comes next. For 8 days, the investigation had no footage. Investigators knew the doorbell camera had disconnected at 1:47 a.m. They knew the motion sensor had registered a person at 2:12 a.m. They knew the pacemaker had gone offline at 2:28 a.m. But the camera itself, the one piece of technology positioned directly at Nancy Guthrie's front entrance, the device designed exactly for moments like this, had produced nothing that anyone could examine. The reason came down to a technical reality that most people who own smart home cameras do not think about. Nancy had a Google Nest doorbell camera, specifically the second-generation wireless model. She did not have an active Nest subscription. Without a paid plan, the Nest system does not continuously upload footage to cloud storage. Instead, on a free account, the camera saves a rolling window of recent activity, roughly the last 3 to 6 hours, and then that data expires and is deleted. By the time investigators first tried to access any recording from the night of January 31st, the footage had already been overwritten. Sheriff Nanos told reporters directly at the February 5th press conference, the camera had no subscription, so the data looped and covered itself up. That was his assessment at the time. They would do all they could, he said, but that was what the analysis teams were telling him. Then the FBI spent 8 more days working with Google. What their technical team discovered is something cybersecurity experts describe as genuinely significant, and something that most users of smart home cameras have no knowledge of. Even on a free account, even after footage is technically deleted or overwritten, residual data can persist in the infrastructure layers that sit behind the device. These are not the files a user can access through an app or a web portal. They exist deeper in the system, in server logs, in data buffers, in the architectural layers that support the device's connection to Google's network. Cybersecurity researcher Jason Jackson told CBS News that Nest cameras may have a tamper detection mode, a security feature that alerts the company when a device is suddenly disconnected or damaged. His theory is that when Google's servers registered the camera going offline, they may have flagged the associated data and held it longer than normal. Whether or not that specific mechanism explains what happened, the outcome was unambiguous. On February 10, 2026, 10 days after Nancy was reported missing, FBI Director Kash Patel posted on X and released the footage publicly. In his statement, he described it as previously inaccessible new images recovered from residual data located in back-end systems. He said the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department had spent 8 days working closely with private sector partners to recover any images or video that may have been lost, corrupted, or inaccessible. In a Fox News interview that same evening, Patel elaborated. We executed lawful searches. went to private sector companies, expedited results, and then went into their systems and actually excavated material that people would think would normally be deleted and no one would look for. A person familiar with the investigation confirmed to CNN's Brian Stelter that the footage was recovered thanks to technical expertise provided by Google directly. The company worked alongside investigators for over a week to make it possible. Google itself did not comment publicly. What they produced, when it was finally released, was the most significant public development in the Nancy Guthrie case. 6 black and white still images and 3 video clips, all bearing the Nest watermark in the corner, all showing the same person, all captured by the camera mounted at Nancy Guthrie's front door in the early hours of February 1st, 2026. The figure in the footage is dressed entirely in dark clothing from head to foot, a full ski mask over the face, a jacket, long pants, gloves, a backpack strapped to the body, and at the waist, visible in multiple frames, a gun in a holster. The footage runs for what one expert later calculated to be approximately 41 minutes of time inside the property. In the video clips that the FBI released publicly, 2 specific moments stand out. In the first, the masked figure approaches the front door and raises a gloved hand directly to the camera lens, pressing it against the glass to block the view. In the second, the figure steps back, scans the ground around the porch, picks up a piece of shrubbery from the yard, a section of plant, a branch of some kind, and holds it up against the camera lens to try to obscure the device entirely. He is holding a flashlight in his mouth while he does it. What those 2 moments reveal, taken together, is something that became immediately contested among the experts who reviewed the footage. On one hand, the suspect was clearly aware of the camera and actively attempted to disable or obstruct it. On the other hand, the fact that he used shrubbery from the ground, an improvised solution grabbed in the moment, suggests he did not arrive with a prepared method for dealing with the camera. CNN senior correspondent and former FBI agent Josh Campbell made this point directly. If the suspect had conducted advanced surveillance on the home and seen the camera, he would have brought a means of obstructing it. He did not. He improvised. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Steve Moore put it more plainly, describing the whole operation as highly premeditated and very poorly planned, and saying he believed this was the first time the suspect had ever done something like this. That tension, meticulous preparation in some areas, obvious gaps in others, runs through every expert analysis of the footage. The FBI confirmed the suspect's physical description through forensic analysis of the doorbell footage by the Bureau's Operational Technology Division. He is male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build. The specific measurements were established through forensic calculation. Investigators later erected a white tent outside Nancy's front entrance, which former NYPD detective Wallace Ziens explained was used to recreate the exact lighting conditions of the night, enabling precise height and proportion measurements from the footage. Armed with a handgun carried in a waist holster, wearing a black 25-liter Ozark Trail Hiker Pack backpack, that backpack became a focal point of the investigation almost immediately. CBS News was the first outlet to confirm that the Ozark Trail Hiker Pack is sold exclusively at Walmart. It is part of the retailer's private label outdoor brand and is not available anywhere else. Sheriff Nanos told the Associated Press directly, "This backpack is exclusive to Walmart, and we are working with Walmart management to develop further leads." He called the backpack one of the most promising leads in the entire case. Walmart cooperated. The company provided investigators with purchase records for every Ozark Trail Hiker Pack sold in recent months, both in-store transactions and online orders, across not just Tucson, but surrounding areas as well. Investigators spent several days reviewing surveillance footage at multiple Walmart locations in the Tucson region. The holster carrying the firearm was also identified by Fox News as a $10 holster from Walmart. The face mask appears lighter in the doorbell footage than it actually is. Nanos explained this is a result of the Nest camera's infrared technology, which causes dark materials to render differently. The mask itself is believed to be black. The clothing, unlike the backpack, is not Walmart exclusive, though investigators believe it may have been purchased there. FBI agents also visited gun stores in the Tucson area, carrying a list of 40 names and photographs, asking employees whether any of the individuals had visited their stores or purchased weapons. That canvas expanded the investigative net beyond the footage itself and into the physical acquisition of the tools the suspect used. Now consider what the footage communicates when examined not just forensically, but behaviorally. Several analysts offered assessments that, taken together, build a detailed picture of who this person is and who he is not. The first expert to examine the footage publicly was Jim Clemente, a retired FBI supervisory special agent and criminal profiler. Clemente made two observations that stand apart from everything else that has been said about this case. The first is what the footage revealed about the suspect's DNA exposure. Despite taking significant precautions, wearing a mask, gloves, full clothing coverage, the suspect did not cover his mouth. Clemente was explicit about what that means. He said the suspect was breathing out DNA for 41 minutes inside that house. His eyes, his eyebrows, his eyelashes, and what Clemente described as some of his mustache hair were all exposed and potentially shedding at the scene. Clemente also noted what appeared in the footage to be a marking on the underside of the suspect's right wrist, possibly a tattoo, visible in one of the clips when the suspect's sleeve shifted during the camera obstruction. A tattoo, Clemente said, would help investigators rule people in or out and would be identifiable to the public. He also assessed from the gun's positioning that the suspect appeared to be right-handed. Clemente's second observation addressed the psychological consequence of the footage being released publicly. He told CNN and later News Nation correspondent Brian Enton that since the footage went public, the suspect's stress level was probably through the roof. The public release of the video, Clemente said, was a deliberate investigative tactic. It creates pressure that can manifest as behavioral change, missing work, canceling commitments, altering appearance. He told Fox News Digital that people around the suspect should be looking for someone who has been under stress for weeks, who may not have shown up for work, called in sick, or backed out of social responsibilities. The footage was not just evidence, it was a message sent directly at the suspect, designed to induce mistakes. Former SWAT commander Josh Sherrard offered a different dimension. Still images, he noted, are not the most powerful identification tool in this footage. The video is, because people are recognized more by the way they move than by visual cues. Seeing someone walk, seeing how they carry themselves, that is how someone who knows this person would identify them, even with the face completely covered. The movement patterns visible in the three video clips are as identifying as a face to the right person watching. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe turned his attention to the holster and used it to make an argument about professional training that carries significant investigative implications. McCabe said directly, "No person with law enforcement or military training would ever carry a firearm in a holster like that, at almost the center of the body, hanging off the belt. It is not tactically sound." He added that the individual's approach to the house was not particularly furtive or concerned. He just walked up, head tilted toward the ground, apparently unconcerned about being observed. That combination, improper firearm handling and an unhurried approach, tells investigators something about the suspect's background, or rather, what it does not include. He was not trained. He was not experienced. McCabe offered one more observation that several other analysts echoed independently. It seemed odd to him, given the circumstances, that only one person appeared in the footage. A residential abduction of a person from inside a home typically involves more than one individual. The logistics, the coordination, the need to manage both access and exit, those generally require multiple people. McCabe said he believed there were likely others involved that the footage simply did not capture. Former FBI agent Brianna Fox agreed with that general read. Watching the video, she described the figure as someone who almost saunters up like it is his house. There is, she said, a lack of concern that he is going to be caught, a kind of bravado that suggests either overconfidence or familiarity with the location, or both. Former FBI senior profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole added the psychological layer. She described the suspect as someone who did not manifest strong signs of nervousness. He was not racing. He was not jittery. She told CNN that calm, in that context, was impressive and concerning. It suggests someone with the psychological capacity to be present at a planned crime scene without the physiological responses that most people would experience. CNN's chief law enforcement and intelligence analyst John Miller turned to what the footage makes possible from a retail investigation standpoint. Each item the suspect is wearing, he said, will be scrutinized for brand and retail source. In past cases, investigators have canvassed clothing and hardware stores specifically to determine whether employees recognized a suspect from the time of purchase. The backpack trail to Walmart was the most direct example of that process already underway. But the gloves, the jacket, the mask, all of it is subject to the same methodology. Body language expert Susan Constantine, reviewing the footage for Fox 10, focused on what the mask does not hide. Despite the full face covering, Constantine said the footage still reveals identifiable physical traits. The eyes are visible. The body structure and proportions are visible. The gait is visible. She described the subject as appearing physically fit and athletically built, with what she assessed as likely brown eyes, tightly trimmed facial hair, and an olive-toned complexion. Her read from the jaw shape and what is visible beneath and around the mask. She said the jawline appeared puffy, which she interpreted as possible beard hair compressing against the mask from the inside. The head shape and lack of visible hair she read as potentially indicating the suspect is bald or closely shaved. She noted the backpack appeared full, loaded with something, suggesting preparation for a specific task. Constantine also described the suspect as someone familiar with the property. The complete absence of visible anxiety in his movement, she said, was the behavior of someone who had been there before and was not surprised by what they encountered. She used a specific phrase that captured her overall assessment in a single word: sociopath. Someone who could approach a home with that level of calm, she said, because that kind of anxiety simply does not register for them. That the footage existed at all was extraordinary. That it survived a camera disconnection, a subscription gap, and over a week of investigative uncertainty was the result of 8 days of technical work between the FBI and Google that most people would have assumed was impossible. And what it showed? A masked, armed figure who came prepared but improvised, who took precautions but left biological traces, who moved calmly but left a backpack sold at one specific retailer, gave investigators more to work with than anything else in the case. The suspect left traces beyond what the camera captured. Some of those traces led to closed doors. One is still open, and it may be the key that breaks this case. The footage answered one question that had been hanging over the investigation since February 1st. Was there a physical person at Nancy Guthrie's front door on the night she disappeared? The answer, once the footage was recovered and released, was unambiguous. There was. He was masked, armed, and deliberate. What investigators needed next was something that could connect a specific human being to that property in a way that could survive a courtroom. Physical evidence, biological material, something traceable to a name. In the weeks that followed the footage release, several pieces of physical evidence emerged. Each generated significant investigative activity. Understanding what each one showed, what it failed to produce, and where it left investigators is the only way to accurately understand the state of this case. The first physical evidence of note arrived 11 days after Nancy disappeared, on the morning of February 12th. A pair of black gloves was found along a road. The distance from Nancy's home, cited across different outlets, ranges from approximately 1.5 to 2.5 miles, with the majority of official sources citing approximately 2 miles. The FBI confirmed publicly that the gloves appeared to match the gloves worn by the masked suspect in the doorbell footage. DNA testing began immediately. Investigators working the broader search area collected approximately 16 pairs of gloves in total from the surrounding roads, desert terrain, and public areas near the Catalina foothills. Most were resolved quickly. They belonged to members of search teams, investigators, volunteers, first responders, who had discarded them after working the area. That is a routine element of large-scale field searches. Protective gloves accumulate in the environment wherever people are working. One pair was different. The gloves found approximately 2 miles away contained DNA from an unidentified male. They were the ones that visually matched the surveillance footage closely enough for the FBI to issue a formal statement saying they appeared to match the gloves of the subject in the video. That DNA profile was extracted and submitted to CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. At the time of submission, CODIS held genetic data from over 26 million individuals with prior arrest records. The search returned no match. Not a single hit across those 26 million profiles. The Sheriff's Department simultaneously confirmed that the DNA from the roadside gloves did not match the separate DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home. Those were two distinct sources of unknown genetic material, and neither connected to the other through the gloves. Investigators pursued the glove DNA through additional channels, including genealogical testing. But the resolution came not from a database at all. It came from ground-level investigative work. Sheriff Nanos confirmed in a March 2nd interview with NBC affiliate KVOA that the gloves had been traced through DNA analysis to a person who works at a restaurant across the street from where the gloves were found. That person is not part of the investigation. Nanos called the public theory that the gloves visually matched the suspects a matter of speculation. His exact description of how the lead was resolved? The owner of the glove we found working at a restaurant across the street. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed officially on March 4, 2026, that the individual is not considered part of this investigation. That lead opened, generated weeks of public attention and investigative resource, and closed without advancing the case. Now consider what Sheriff Nanos said at roughly the same time that glove lead was closing. In a February interview, he was explicit about prioritization. He described the gloves found 2 miles away as comparatively lower priority than what was sitting in a laboratory in Florida. He said, "I'm not dismissing the glove 2 miles away, but I have gloves 5 miles away, 10 miles away. We prioritize." The DNA he considered more significant, more likely to ultimately lead somewhere, was not from a roadside glove. It was from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. That second category of DNA evidence is distinct from the gloves in every meaningful way. Unknown male DNA was recovered directly from Nancy's property, from inside the residence itself. It does not belong to Nancy. It does not match anyone in her known contacts. It does not match the DNA from the roadside gloves. Sheriff Nanos confirmed to NBC News that the DNA found at the home contains genetic material from more than one person. It is a mixture. When DNA from multiple contributors is intermingled in a single sample, extracting a clean, isolatable genetic profile that can be matched to a specific individual becomes substantially more difficult. One source close to the investigation told CBS News that the DNA from the home may not yield a usable profile at all, describing the quality as low level. Nanos himself told reporters in late February that the laboratory was telling him there are challenges with it, and that the technology was moving fast enough that some of the analytical problems might resolve in a matter of weeks, months, or possibly a year. The laboratory processing that evidence is not the FBI's National Crime Lab in Quantico, Virginia. The FBI formally requested that physical evidence, including the DNA samples, be sent to Quantico. Sheriff Nanos declined. He has been using a private laboratory in Florida instead, a facility his department has worked with for years. His stated reasoning was that he does not want samples divided between two different facilities. News Nation reported that a source familiar with the case described this arrangement as creating unnecessary delays in entering the DNA into CODIS because the FBI does not accept direct submissions from private laboratories. Once testing is complete in Florida, the DNA data must first be routed back through the Arizona state system before it can be forwarded to the FBI for CODIS entry. Every additional step in that chain costs time, and time is a live variable in this investigation. With CODIS producing no matches on the glove DNA and the property DNA still being processed, investigators pivoted to a more powerful but more time-consuming technique. Forensic genetic genealogy has solved cases that conventional methods could not reach. It identified the Golden State Killer after more than 40 years of searching. It identified Brian Kohberger in the University of Idaho murders. The process works by searching commercial ancestry databases, platforms like Ancestry DNA and 23andMe, for partial familial matches to an unknown DNA profile. When a suspect is not in any law enforcement database, this method can still find them if a biological relative has voluntarily submitted their DNA to one of these services. Once a familial match is identified, investigators work backwards through the family tree, cross-referencing with geographic location, physical profile, and other known information until a candidate emerges. In the Kohberger case, it took approximately 6 weeks from the first genealogical match to locating the suspect. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Lance Lysing was honest about the process's demands. He told CBS News that it could produce multiple people within the same DNA family who each need to be independently investigated before a conclusion can be reached. A federal law enforcement source confirmed to CBS News that investigators are searching commercial genealogy databases as a parallel track, entirely separate from CODIS. Both tracks are running simultaneously. Alongside the DNA investigation, investigators are pursuing another physical lead from the footage itself that has received less attention. Sheriff Nanos told NBC News that when examining close-up images of the suspect's hands, there is a possible image of the suspect wearing a ring beneath his glove. a detail visible in at least one frame. Nanos said his team would analyze it further. The holster the suspect carries has also drawn specific investigative attention. In the same interview, Nanos described the holster as having some pretty unique characteristics. The FBI and Sheriff's Department have visited gun stores in the Tucson area, showing a list of names and photographs to employees, asking whether any of the individuals had visited the store or purchased weapons. Now, there is a dimension of the pacemaker evidence that goes beyond what was covered in the previous chapter, and it represents one of the most technically creative investigative responses in this entire case. Nancy's pacemaker did not simply generate historical data that investigators retrieved from her iPhone's app after she disappeared. It continued to function in real time after being separated from her phone. Modern pacemakers are designed to transmit Bluetooth signals continuously, even without a paired device nearby, sending a connection request approximately every 2 to 3 minutes, searching for a compatible receiver. That signal carries a unique media access control address, a device-specific digital identifier that can, under the right technical conditions, be detected and distinguished from all other Bluetooth signals in the surrounding environment. Investigators used that fact to deploy a technique that had not previously been applied at scale in a case like this. A device known as a signal sniffer, a portable radio detection tool equipped with a directional antenna and signal amplifier, was mounted to a Pima County Sheriff's Department helicopter and flown slowly at low altitude over the Tucson area. The objective was to try to pick up the Bluetooth signal from Nancy's pacemaker and, if the device detected it, triangulate her location. An FBI source confirmed to News Nation that the technology deployed was sophisticated FBI equipment. Morgan Wright, the CEO of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, who helped develop a drone-based version of the same technology, described the pacemaker in a way that captures why investigators invested in this approach. It is the most unbiased witness we have, because it is sending telemetry data. The pacemaker has 6 to 7 years of its battery life remaining, according to Sheriff Nanos, who confirmed investigators obtained that information from the manufacturer. Nancy's pacemaker is running inside her body, wherever she is. If she is within detectable range of a signal sniffer, the device will respond. The limitation is physics. Bluetooth low-energy signals operate over a short range, typically 10 to 30 feet under real conditions, extendable to several hundred feet with specialized amplification. The helicopter has to be close. Flying over vast desert terrain around Tucson, the margin for a successful detection is narrow. A technology company called Bluefly, which specializes in search and rescue operations, confirmed publicly that the Pima County Sheriff's Department requested its support early in the investigation. Bluefly stated that its technology has been used on a variety of air and ground vehicles and on foot in austere terrain, providing investigators with a heat map to identify signals within a search area. David Kennedy, a former NSA hacker who invented a signal sniffer variant specifically for this type of application, told CBS News that he was able to extend the Bluetooth detection range to several hundred feet using amplifiers and high-gain antennas, working from a modified, non-commercial drone. He and Wright developed a drone-based version of the system, arguing that drones fly lower and slower than helicopters, cover more ground more efficiently, and can be coordinated in fleets programmed to sweep defined search grids using artificial intelligence. Wright confirmed the FBI had a prototype of this drone system and was expected to deploy it within days of the initial helicopter runs. Whether the signal sniffer has detected anything from Nancy's pacemaker has not been publicly reported. The fourth piece of physical evidence that was formally examined is Annie Guthrie's vehicle, a blue Honda CR-V. As established in the previous chapter, it was the car Tommaso Cioni used to drive Nancy home on the night of January 31st. The vehicle was impounded by the Pima County Sheriff's Department, held at an auto mechanic facility under law enforcement custody, and subjected to what Parade described as an exhaustive search. No information has been released about what, if anything, was found during that examination. The vehicle has since been returned to the family. Now there is the matter of the ransom communications, and this is a part of the story that has been widely reported but rarely separated clearly into its distinct and very different components. There are essentially two threads, and they must not be conflated. The first and more credible thread began on the evening of Monday, February 2nd, 2026, one day after the 911 call. KOLD News 13, the CBS affiliate in Tucson, received a message through its anonymous online tip portal at approximately 5 p.m. The message was a ransom demand, requesting Bitcoin payment for Nancy's return. KOLD immediately forwarded it to investigators without publishing its contents. The FBI and Sheriff's Department issued a joint statement acknowledging they were aware of reports and were taking it seriously. What elevated that first KOLD note above the level of an ordinary anonymous tip were two specific details that it contained. Details that law enforcement officials subsequently confirmed had not been made public at the time the note was sent. The note referenced the location of Nancy Guthrie's Apple Watch, and it referenced a floodlight at her home that had been destroyed. FBI Special Agent in Charge Hyth Janke confirmed at a press conference that the note discussed an Apple Watch and a floodlight. KOLD anchor Mary Coleman, who saw the note, told CNN, "A lot of it is information that only someone who was holding her for ransom would know. Some very sensitive information and things that people who were there when she was taken captive would know." The first note contained two deadlines: 5 p.m. Thursday, February 5th, and then 5 p.m. Monday, February 9th, if the first deadline passed without action. It initially demanded $4 million in Bitcoin. By the second deadline, the demand had risen to $6 million. Both deadlines passed without action. The family, in a video released on February 7th, addressed the possible captor directly. Seated together, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron, the siblings said, "We received your message and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us. This is very valuable to us and we will pay." That phrasing was deliberate, calibrated to keep contact open without confirming the note's validity. The note was also sent to two Tucson television stations, KOLD and KGUN, as well as to TMZ, whose founder Harvey Levin told CNN the note began by stating that Nancy was okay, but scared. Levin said the specific detail about the Apple Watch's placement piqued the FBI's interest and made him increasingly believe the notes were connected to whoever actually took Nancy. He described the grammar as perfect and the structure as layered and organized, not the work of a casual opportunist. There is, however, a meaningful counter-argument that deserves equal weight. NBC News law enforcement analyst Jim Kavanaugh examined the Apple Watch reference and drew a different conclusion. He told NBC News that anyone could have known Nancy wore an Apple Watch simply by running a Google search. There are publicly available photographs of Nancy on the Today Show set where an Apple Watch is prominently visible on her wrist. He said anyone sitting anywhere in the world with an internet connection could see those images and use the Apple Watch detail in a ransom demand without having been anywhere near Nancy or her home. That counterpoint does not prove the notes are fake. It introduces reasonable uncertainty about whether the Apple Watch detail alone is sufficient evidence of insider knowledge. TMZ subsequently reported receiving a separate digital communication, an email claiming to know the identity of the kidnapper and demanding $100,000 in cryptocurrency in exchange for providing that name. TMZ described the message as highly sophisticated. This communication is separate from the KOLD notes and has not been officially authenticated by investigators. The second thread, entirely unrelated to the actual case, involved a California man named Derek Colella. Colella, 42, of Hawthorne, California, sent 2 text messages on February 4, 2026 to Annie Guthrie and her husband Tommaso Cioni using a voice-over internet protocol app that allowed him to generate an anonymous phone number. The message both of them received was identical. "Did you get the Bitcoin? We're waiting on our end for the transaction." 3 minutes after the texts, a 9-second phone call was placed to one of them from the same number. Investigators traced the VoIP number through open-source methods to an email account registered in Colella's own name, derekcolella@gmail.com, and determined it was accessed from an IP address associated with his residence in California. He was arrested on February 5th. After being read his rights, he admitted to sending the messages. He told investigators he had been following the case on television and wanted to see if the family would respond. FBI Special Agent in Charge, Hythe Janke, was explicit at the press conference following Colella's arrest. The text messages he allegedly sent are not linked to the actual ransom demand being investigated as potentially connected to the abduction. Colella was charged with 2 federal counts: transmitting a demand for ransom across state lines and using a telecommunications device with intent to anonymously abuse, threaten, or harass. He made his initial court appearance and was released under supervision conditions that included no contact with witnesses or victims and monitoring of all his electronic devices. Sheriff Nanos acknowledged publicly that there is an absolute possibility the original KOLD ransom communications have nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. The FBI and the Sheriff's Department issued a joint statement saying they were actively inspecting the messages for their authenticity. As of the most recent public statements, none of the ransom communications have been confirmed as valid by law enforcement, and no proof of life has been received or verified at any point. Former FBI Special Agent Harry Trumbitis offered a measured assessment of where the ransom theory stood in the broader investigation. He told Yahoo News that ransom as a motive was appearing less and less likely as time passed. His reasoning was straightforward. There are too many ways people can get caught, and ransom kidnappings in the United States have genuinely decreased significantly over the years. The complexity required to execute a successful ransom extraction, sustained communication, anonymous payment receipt, safe handover of the victim, creates multiple points of exposure for the perpetrator. The longer the communications have remained unverified, and the longer no contact is maintained with the family, the less the overall picture resembles a classic ransom operation. The forensic evidence in this case points inward, to the property, to the DNA still being analyzed in a Florida laboratory, to the data from a pacemaker still pinging somewhere in the desert air around Tucson. The investigative response has extended outward, across the city, down toward the southern border, and, in one case, all the way to a federal courtroom in California. None of it has yet produced an arrest. What it has produced is a series of searches, detentions, and operational moments of intensity that illuminate just how many threads investigators are simultaneously pulling, and how few have yet led to the door they are looking for. We are past the halfway point, and the evidence trail keeps going. The DNA is still being processed. Investigators went back into the neighborhood weeks after the abduction, asking new questions. The family renewed their public appeal just days ago. Every time something moves in this case, it lands here first on Crime Justice's network. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that button now. Let us keep going. By the time the doorbell footage was public and the glove DNA had been processed, investigators were running an operation that stretched well beyond the boundaries of Nancy Guthrie's property. What the public saw, press conferences, footage releases, warrant executions, represented only a fraction of the activity underway. What follows is a complete account of every operational development that has been publicly confirmed, in the order it occurred, with nothing invented and nothing repeated from what the previous chapters have already established. The multi-agency response began formally on February 2, 2026, one day after the 911 call. The Pima County Sheriff's Department, which had been working the case since the previous afternoon, was joined by the FBI's Phoenix Division. Critically, the FBI joined on its own initiative. Sheriff Nanos did not call the Bureau. The FBI asked to be involved. That distinction matters because it reflects how quickly the Bureau assessed the case as warranting federal resources and federal authority. U.S. Customs and Border Protection also joined, given Tucson's proximity to the southern border, approximately 70 miles north of Mexico. The Tucson Sector Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue Team formally joined the effort on February 5th. Multiple search and rescue teams were deployed alongside law enforcement, equipped with cadaver dogs, drones, and aerial surveillance platforms. At its peak, 400 investigators were assigned to the case, operating around the clock, the Sheriff's Department confirmed. That scale of response is extraordinary. It reflected the severity of the evidence, the national profile of the case, and the pressing medical urgency around a missing 84-year-old woman without her medication. By the third week, that number was being scaled back as the initial surge phase wound down. The Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a formal statement saying it was refocusing resources specifically to detectives assigned to the case, and that patrol presence in the Guthrie neighborhood would be maintained. Investigators acknowledged internally that the case would need to move into a longer-term phase, with a smaller but more concentrated task force. That transition became official in early March. News Nation correspondent Brian Enton reported that 5 Pima County Sheriff's Department officers and several FBI agents were assigned full-time to the Guthrie investigation as a dedicated violent crimes task force. On March 6th, agents wearing shirts identifying them as the Violent Crimes Task Force were seen going door to door in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood, asking new questions of neighbors. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, who spent 25 years with the Bureau, described the formation of that task force to News Nation as a meaningful, positive signal. She called the Violent Crimes Task Force the alpha dogs of federal law enforcement, a unit that takes no prisoners, that goes exactly where it needs to go, and that operates from a specific direction, rather than canvassing broadly. One neighbor told Enton the task force investigators were noticeably more focused in their questioning than earlier canvassing efforts had been. O'Connell said that kind of focus is itself a sign. When you are focused, you have something to focus on. You are looking in a certain direction, and the evidence is leading you there. At the federal level, FBI Director Kash Patel visited the Tucson Command Center on February 10th, the same day the doorbell footage was released publicly. President Trump was briefed on the surveillance imagery and told reporters on February 13th that progress had been made. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt publicly encouraged anyone with information to contact the FBI. Later in the investigation, federal prosecutors accompanied FBI special agents to Nancy's home as part of ongoing support for the investigation, a development that former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer described as a signal that the Bureau was asserting federal jurisdiction, pointing to the statute that presumes interstate transportation when a kidnapped person has not been released within 24 hours. The FBI's command post in Tucson was subsequently moved back to the Phoenix field office, which is standard procedure once a case transitions from its initial active surge to a sustained investigative posture. As CNN confirmed from the sheriff's office, the task force of 20 to 24 personnel continued to operate from the FBI's Phoenix Division office in Tucson. The first external operational development came on February 10th, the same day as the footage release, when a man was detained during a traffic stop in Rio Rico, Arizona, approximately 60 miles south of Tucson near the U.S.-Mexico border. A search warrant was simultaneously executed on a nearby property and vehicle. The man subsequently identified himself publicly as Carlos Palazuelos, speaking to Telemundo, Arizona in Spanish outside his home in Rio Rico. He said he was a delivery driver with no knowledge of Nancy Guthrie or the case. By February 11th, he had been released without charges, and Sheriff Nanos confirmed he was not involved. ABC News later reported that investigators had identified Carlos through electronic tools, including cell phone usage information and traffic data, before the public footage release. He was already under scrutiny before the images went public. 3 days after Rio Rico, on the evening of February 13th, the most significant domestic law enforcement operation of the investigation took place. The location was a private residence near the intersection of Camino de Michael and East Orange Grove Road in Tucson, approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home. Dozens of law enforcement vehicles arrived. Roads in the surrounding area were closed. The operation involved both Pima County Sheriff's Department deputies and FBI agents, and it ran for approximately 4 hours before investigators departed. 2 people were detained from the residence. One was Luke Daly, 37, a Tucson resident with an extensive prior criminal record. Between 2019 and 2020, he served 18 months in state prison on convictions including drug solicitation, criminal damage, and flight from law enforcement. In 2022, he was arrested and subsequently convicted of drug distribution, receiving 4 years of probation. In May 2025, he was arrested in a Walmart parking lot in Marana, northwest of Tucson, accused of possessing fentanyl, drug paraphernalia, and a firearm despite his prior felony conviction. A probation officer had sought to revoke his probation, but a judge allowed him to remain in the community. The second person detained was Luke Daly's mother, Mary Chapman Daly, 77. Their home sat approximately 2 miles from Nancy's residence. 2 search warrants were executed that night, one on the property and one on Daly's gray Range Rover, which was towed from the scene after being marked with evidence tape. Daly was held for approximately 4 to 5 hours, handcuffed in the back of a police car while deputies and agents searched his home and vehicle. Both he and his mother were released the following day without charges. Simultaneously, while the residence operation was underway, investigators surrounded a separate gray Range Rover in the parking lot of a nearby Culver's restaurant. The FBI and Pima County Sheriff's Department processed that vehicle at the scene. The driver was questioned for an extended period, but was not arrested. CNN confirmed investigators had towed the Range Rover and processed it for evidence. It is also worth noting one additional confirmed detail from the February 13th operation. A second individual, separate from Daly and his mother, was already in custody at the Pima County Adult Detention Complex that night on unrelated charges for allegedly skipping court dates. That person was not connected to the Daly operation. 2 separate investigative threads were running simultaneously. Daly's attorney, Chris Shalepi, issued a statement. Luke Daly was the subject of 2 search warrants issued and served on February 13th. Mr. Daly and his mother were both detained while the search warrants were being executed. Neither was arrested in connection with this case or any other. Mr. Daly has no link whatsoever to Nancy Guthrie and has no information related to her kidnapping. Daly later gave his first public interview to Brianna Whitney of Arizona's Family and the True Crime Arizona series. He was direct. He said, "It is not me. I don't see the resemblance of it looking like me. If I knew who was involved, I would happily tell the FBI, police, anyone. I, like everyone else, just want Nancy to come home and be safe." He asked people to stop acting on speculation from things they read online, noting the public scrutiny had made it hard for him to go anywhere. His Range Rover was subsequently returned to him. While those detentions were generating public attention, a quieter but potentially more significant investigative thread was developing in the neighborhood itself. On March 5th, FBI agents and Pima County Sheriff's deputies went door to door through the Catalina foothills asking neighbors a specific question. Did you notice any disruptions or glitches with your internet connection on the night of February 1st? Several neighbors confirmed to NBC News that investigators told them multiple residents in the area had already mentioned internet connection issues that night. The agents specifically asked about that and nothing else on the connectivity question. A couple living adjacent to Nancy's property told NBC News they had 4 security cameras on their home. The camera positioned closest to Nancy's house showed footage logged as not available during the overnight hours of February 1st, the exact window during which Nancy disappeared. The neighbor described the timing as uncanny. News Nation's Brian Enton later showed via a posting on X that the Ring cameras experiencing the disruptions were close enough to Nancy's property that her rooftop was visible from their position. This raised an immediate and widely discussed question. Was a Wi-Fi jamming device deployed in the neighborhood on the night of the abduction? An apparent antenna-like device is visible protruding from the suspect's pocket in the doorbell footage, and Wi-Fi jammers, while illegal under Federal Communications Commission guidelines in the United States, are commercially available and not technically sophisticated. Several technology experts offered a significant counterpoint that deserves equal weight. Morgan Wright, the CEO of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, who had analyzed the footage closely, told Fox News that if a genuine Wi-Fi jammer had been running near the front of the property, investigators would not have gotten the clear, unglitched images that the Nest camera produced. Commercial jammers, he noted, have a range of approximately 10 to 30 yards. For a device to affect neighbors' cameras across open desert terrain, it would require high-powered military-grade equipment. Former FBI agent Tracy Walder told Fox News the device in the suspect's pocket was more likely a handheld radio, and that using a radio rather than a burner phone was arguably smarter given what sophisticated criminals understand about the FBI's monitoring capabilities. Retired police sergeant and National Police Association spokesperson Betsy Brantner Smith agreed the theory was possible, but that it would require a level of advanced planning that, if accurate, pointed to someone who knew Nancy specifically and targeted her by name. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed awareness of a damaged utility box located around the corner from Nancy's home and stated it was being examined as part of the investigation. It has not been publicly linked to the abduction. Nanos, when asked directly by NBC News whether the suspect may have been carrying a jammer, said he had not looked at that closely personally, but that his team had examined it with the FBI from every angle. The search at Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cione's home produced one visible moment in the early days of the investigation that has never been publicly explained. Investigators were observed leaving the property carrying a paper grocery bag, a white trash bag, and a stack of mail from the roadside mailbox, both wearing protective gloves. No information has been released about what, if anything, was collected or found during that visit. On March 13th, law enforcement sources briefed NBC News on a separate development that received limited coverage. Investigators had retrieved additional images from surveillance cameras installed at Nancy's property. A camera fixed to a fence covering the back of the house, and another focused on the driveway and the front of the garage door. That footage stretched back weeks before the abduction. It captured family members, landscapers, and pool workers. Nothing in that footage was deemed suspicious, and the suspect seen on the front door camera does not appear in any of the newly recovered material. The doorbell footage released on February 10th remains the only known images of the suspect that investigators have. Regarding the overall volume of public response, by February 11th, the Sheriff's Department had received over 18,000 calls. More than 4,000 came in after the FBI footage release alone. After the Guthrie family announced a $1 million reward on February 24th, the FBI received over 1,500 additional leads. CNN's senior law enforcement analyst Josh Campbell noted that being inundated with tips is not automatically beneficial. Sorting fact from false lead takes investigative time, and in a kidnapping case, time is the one variable that cannot be recovered. Among the unconfirmed tips being reviewed, at least one report of a white van seen in the neighborhood during a relevant time window, confirmed by Nanos as being reviewed. A Ring camera, approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home, captured 12 vehicles passing around the time of the abduction. Investigators reviewed that footage and, as of the most recent public statements, had not identified any of those vehicles as connected to the case. Cadaver dogs were deployed in the initial phase of the search. They have since been stood down from active deployment, remaining available for redeployment if a specific location requires it. Their stand down does not mean investigators believe Nancy is deceased. The formal position of law enforcement, maintained consistently throughout the investigation, is that the case is being conducted under the presumption that Nancy Guthrie is still alive. The investigation reached beyond the property, beyond Tucson, and into the question of how this crime was planned and who had the access, the knowledge, and the time in that neighborhood to make it possible. The operational story, the detentions, the tip processing, the neighborhood canvassing, the Wi-Fi disruption inquiry, is what investigators did in response to the crime. But there is a parallel question, older and deeper, that requires working backwards from February 1st rather than forward from it. Someone chose Nancy Guthrie. Someone chose her house. Someone chose that night. That level of targeting does not emerge from nowhere. It is the product of observation, of time spent in a place, of knowledge accumulated before the act. This chapter is about the planning, what it may have looked like, who may have been involved, and what it reveals about the gap between what investigators have found and what they may still be missing. In the 6th and 7th weeks of the investigation, the FBI returned to the Catalina Foothills neighborhood with a different kind of question. Not the broad canvas of the initial surge, not who heard something, who saw something, who had a camera pointed at the right stretch of road. These were specific questions, targeting specific categories of people and properties that investigators had identified as potentially relevant to how the crime was planned, not merely how it was executed. News Nation correspondent Brian Enton, who had maintained a continuous on-the-ground presence in Tucson throughout, reported on the March 17th episode of his Brian Enton Investigates program that he had confirmed through sources that the FBI had been back in Nancy's neighborhood within the last 24 hours, going back to neighbors' houses and asking more questions. Two separate lines of inquiry stood out. The first was a property that had recently become vacant. Enton was careful in how he framed it. There is one neighbor that moved out before Nancy disappeared, and they are asking more questions about that situation. Not to say that has anything to do with what happened, but that is something the FBI agents are asking about. The vacant property question had actually surfaced earlier in the investigation through neighbor accounts. Aldine Meister, who has lived in the Catalina foothills for nearly 30 years, had already told Enton during an earlier interview that there was an abandoned house at the end of the street, and somebody had just moved out next to her. She had specifically asked investigators to check that house. A second thread on the vacancy came from another neighbor, Laura Gargano, who told Enton on his podcast that a rental property nearby had occupants who moved out within a few days of the kidnapping, noting that the car was simply gone. Whether the departure from the rental property preceded February 1st or followed it closely has not been definitively resolved through official sources, and investigators have not publicly clarified the timeline. What they have confirmed is that the questions are being asked. Investigative journalist JLR reported separately on X that the FBI had visited a specific house under construction at the corner of Camino Escalante and Camino Miraval, just down the street from Nancy's home. According to that reporting, agents interviewed workers at the site, checked the outbuildings and sheds, and walked the property. On the construction question, Enton was notably specific. He confirmed that there are several houses under construction in the Catalina foothills area, and that agents were asking residents for the names of every contractor and every worker who had been on those construction sites in the weeks before the abduction. Not general descriptions, names. Enton described the level of specificity as striking. Investigators want the names of all the contractors and workers who were working on those houses. He noted that he could see active construction himself while driving through the neighborhood, and described the requests as an interesting new development, indicating investigators were building a comprehensive picture of who had physical access to that street during the period of pre-offense reconnaissance. Retired Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Krieger, who spent nearly 30 years with Pima County law enforcement, gave Parade an exclusive interview explaining what a vacant property means in the context of an abduction investigation. Krieger told Parade that investigators would look at such a location as a possible home base or staging location for a suspect or suspects. It would provide a cover story, a reason to be present in the neighborhood at different times, to observe the comings and goings of residents, to watch specific properties, to study timing and routine. Staying at a nearby vacant home, he said, would offer an opportunity to be a little bit more under the radar, to see the activity of the neighborhood, to see the comings and goings of people, the timing of things, including Nancy. He added a second dimension. A location like that, out of the prying eye of the neighborhood, could also be a location to set up surveillance equipment if anyone chose to do so. It could be easily stashed in a structure or on the property without anyone knowing. Krieger was also careful to state what his analysis does not mean. Investigators examining a vacant property is standard follow-up as a case progresses. It does not confirm the property was used in the crime. He described the FBI's return as just more follow-up, adding that new viable leads pop up all the time. Someone in the area could see or hear something, and it shakes loose a memory they had put away as nothing at the time. What the seventh-week return does confirm is that investigators have identified this line of inquiry as worth pursuing, and that it is in itself a signal about where the investigation is looking. Now to the question that former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe raised when examining the doorbell footage, and that the investigation's own official position has also addressed directly. Did the masked figure on Nancy's camera act alone? Retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb, a combat infantry veteran of Operation Desert Storm with extensive experience in abduction and violent crime cases, gave an exclusive interview to Parade, published on March 19, 2026. His assessment was unambiguous. He said he does not believe the figure on the doorbell camera acted alone. He said, "I believe there are anywhere between 2 to 4 accomplices. The logistics of something of this magnitude is too much for one person to handle, in my professional opinion, based on the facts as I know them right now." On the reconnaissance question, Dabb said it is more than likely the home was canvassed prior, either by the kidnapper himself or an accomplice. Whether or not they knew a camera was there was a culmination of their reconnoiter. And on the nature of the crime itself, burglars do not go to burglarize a house with a full backpack. This was a kidnapping. Professional burglars, he noted, monitor homes to ensure they are empty before entering. The perpetrator or perpetrators entered at a time when it was almost certain Nancy would be home after an evening with family. That single fact eliminates the burglary theory entirely. The target was the resident, not her belongings. This is not an isolated expert opinion. Pima County Sheriff's Department Public Information Officer Angelica Carrillo confirmed to Newsweek that Sheriff Nanos has always said it is possible that more than one person was involved. The official investigative position does not rule out multiple perpetrators. The footage shows only one figure at the door, but it does not establish that only one person was present that night across the full geography of the property, the surrounding streets, and any waiting vehicle. Now consider the population of people who had the most natural, regular, unremarkable opportunity to observe Nancy's property in the months and weeks before February 1st. The Catalina Foothills is a neighborhood where the people physically present on the streets every day are not primarily the homeowners. The residents are largely invisible, behind walls, inside homes, working remotely, traveling, or receiving services. The people who are consistently, visibly, physically present are service workers, landscapers managing the desert plants and hedges along property lines, pool maintenance crews, HVAC technicians on service calls, construction workers on multiple active builds across the neighborhood, pest control teams, delivery drivers, the people who move through gates and driveways and alleys on routes they know by memory. These workers accumulate what criminologists call ambient surveillance, the passive, comprehensive awareness of a property and its routines that builds simply from regular presence. They know which camera is mounted at which angle. They know which driveways are empty every morning and which car never leaves. They know which residents open their doors and which do not. They know the rhythms of a street the way only repeated physical presence allows. This knowledge is not the result of deliberate surveillance. It is the natural consequence of being somewhere often enough to understand it without consciously trying to. A man who works as a gardener in Nancy's neighborhood came forward in mid-March 2026. In a video posted to X on March 13th by true crime investigator JLR Investigates and later discussed in depth by Brian Enton, the gardener confirmed two things of direct investigative relevance. First, that as of the date of his interview, no investigator had come to speak with him. No sheriff's deputy, no FBI agent, no member of the Violent Crimes Task Force. He had been on that street regularly, and nobody had come. Second, that the last time he had physically seen Nancy Guthrie, in person at the front of her property, close enough for a brief exchange, was approximately 8 months to a year before she disappeared. His own words, quoted across multiple outlets. "It has probably been about a year, maybe 8 months, since I last saw Ms. Guthrie in the morning." His service route runs on a bi-monthly schedule, and across those visits over the better part of a year, he had not encountered her. This gardener is not a suspect. Nothing in his account suggests any connection to the crime. What his account reveals is a structural gap in the investigative canvas. A person with regular physical access to that street, with direct sight lines to Nancy's property, with the kind of accumulated ambient knowledge of that neighborhood that investigators were now specifically seeking from construction workers and contractors, and yet for more than 6 weeks after her disappearance, nobody had come to ask him anything. Aldine Meister's account adds another layer of depth to the pre-abduction picture. Meister, who has lived in the Catalina foothills for nearly 30 years, told Enton about a sighting she had approximately 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared. She pinpointed the date as around January 11th. She remembered it because her birthday is January 8th, and the sighting came shortly after. Through her bathroom window one morning, she observed a man walking down the road toward Nancy's home. He was dressed in street clothing rather than the walking or hiking gear common on those streets. His hat was pulled way down over his face. He was moving slowly, not at the pace of someone getting exercise. And when he passed the street where Nancy's house sits, he really took a long look at it. Meister's own description: he just didn't fit. And the observation stayed with her enough that she said something to her husband and her mother. It was only after Nancy disappeared that she understood why it might matter. She reported the sighting to the FBI the day after agents first came to her door. Meister confirmed to Enton that she had told investigators, "I told the FBI the day after they came here, and I discussed that with them. The Catalina foothills is not a neighborhood where strangers pass through accidentally." Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Steve Moore made this point in a different context during the investigation. If you go into that neighborhood, you mean to be there. The streets do not connect elsewhere. They are destinations. A man in street clothing, moving slowly, with his hat pulled down, pausing to take a long look at a specific house, in that neighborhood, in that context, is unusual enough to stay in a 30-year resident's memory for 3 weeks, and then crystallize into something that feels significant the moment a neighbor disappears. The FBI's return to the neighborhood in week 7, asking for contractor names, asking about vacant properties, asking about who had moved out, confirms investigators have identified the ambient surveillance gap and are working to close it. The question is how wide that gap actually is. The gardener was uncontacted for more than 6 weeks. The neighbor with concerns about the vacant property had to raise it herself with a journalist before investigators formally examined it. Construction crews were apparently not exhaustively canvassed in the initial surge. In a crime that depended on detailed prior knowledge of a specific woman on a specific residential street, the people who carry that kind of knowledge as part of their daily working lives were not the first priority of the investigation's opening phase. That is not a criticism of the surge response. A 400-person operation managing 50,000 tips must triage relentlessly. What the 7th week reveals is a second layer of potential witness intelligence that is only now being fully accessed. The investigation, as the public has seen it, is only part of what is happening. The real pressure in the 8th week sits on the task force itself, on a sheriff facing a recall effort and mounting institutional criticism, and on a 52-day timeline that keeps running without a named suspect. The investigation, as the public experienced it, footage releases, detentions, tip surges, neighborhood canvasses, the vacant property inquiry, unfolded under a specific institutional structure and a specific face. That face has been Sheriff Chris Nanos. And the pressure surrounding that face, by the time this documentary was produced on day 52, had become a story almost as significant as the investigation itself. Begin with the federal architecture, because it is not incidental to understanding everything that followed. The FBI joined the Guthrie investigation on February 2nd at the Bureau's own initiative. From that point, the case was co-managed between the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI's Phoenix Division, which operates a substantial field office in Tucson and managed the investigation from that base throughout. A violent crimes task force, approximately 20 to 24 personnel, roughly half from the Sheriff's Office and half from the FBI, has been the operational core of the investigation since the initial surge of 400 investigators was scaled back in the third week. FBI Director Kash Patel visited the Tucson Command Center on February 10th. President Trump was briefed on the surveillance imagery. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt made a public statement urging anyone with information to contact the FBI. Federal prosecutors accompanied FBI special agents to Nancy's home in late February to continue supporting the investigation. U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona, Timothy Corshane, stated publicly that his office would go anywhere, do anything, and persevere always to find her. This case had direct federal attention from the top of the chain from very early in the process. One reported friction point between the agencies belongs on the record. The FBI formally requested that physical evidence, including the gloves and the DNA samples, be sent to the Bureau's National Crime Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. Sheriff Nanos declined and sent the evidence to a private laboratory in Florida instead. His publicly stated reasoning was that his department has used that Florida lab for years and that he did not want samples divided between two different facilities. That explanation did not satisfy everyone. NewsNation reported that a source familiar with the case described the arrangement as creating unnecessary delays because the FBI cannot accept direct submissions from private laboratories. The DNA must first route back through the Arizona state system before reaching the Bureau for CODIS entry. Retired law enforcement analysts covering the case raised the dispute publicly. It became one of several friction points between the federal and county sides of the investigation. Sheriff Nanos has been the primary public voice of the investigation from day one, giving extensive access to NBC News, CBS News, CNN, Fox News, and local Tucson outlets for more than 50 days. He has also been the primary target of the criticism that built around the investigation as it extended into its 7th and 8th weeks without a named suspect. That criticism arrived from multiple directions simultaneously and with escalating force. There were concerns about the pace of the investigation. There were concerns about the handling of the crime scene. There were concerns about contradictory public statements. And there were specific incidents that became flashpoints in the court of public opinion. When the Guthrie family was filming a direct address video to their mother's potential captors, Nanos attended a University of Arizona basketball game. The optics generated significant backlash. Nanos later explained to Buckmaster and Stellar during the KVOI interview that he had obtained the tickets weeks earlier from his former dentist and that he had needed a break. He then offered the reason for that need that had not been publicly known. On the 2nd of February, I learned my brother was in the hospital. I believe 3 days later he passed away, and I just needed a break. I'm sorry. That context had not been shared before. Whether it satisfies the critics is a separate question, but it adds a dimension to the man that the coverage had not previously included. On the crime scene itself, Nanos made a public admission in a press conference that has remained part of the critical record against him. When asked whether he would have done anything differently, he told reporters he probably would have kept the property as a crime scene longer if he could do it over. He said, "We processed the scene. We got what we thought was complete, and I have to have faith and trust in my team's abilities." Yet when Buckmaster and Stellar asked the same question in the March 20th radio interview, Nanos reversed that position entirely. He said, "Nothing different. I mean, I wish there was something I could do differently that would have produced better results, but no." That is a direct contradiction of his earlier public statement, and it was noted by investigative reporter Brian Entin in his subsequent program coverage. The contradictions in Nanos's public statements extended further. In mid-March, speaking to NBC News, he had said, "We believe we know why he did this, and we believe it was targeted." Then, acknowledging uncertainty about whether the suspect could strike again, he told the same outlet, "Don't think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you're safe. Keep your wits about you." But then, in the KVOI radio interview, he pulled back from that. "Don't worry about it. Relax. This was the Guthrie family." He also addressed the question of whether the doorbell camera images were taken on two different dates, a key investigative question discussed at length in earlier chapters. He told the radio audience that he could not confirm any timestamps or dates on those photographs, that it would be irresponsible to tell people the images were from different days without certainty, and that everything speculative needed to wait for the evidence to speak. Nanos told the radio host directly, "Right now, everything is speculative. We don't have anything in front of us that says this is who did this and this is why." Then came the resume story, and it arrived on top of everything else. On March 10th, the Arizona Republic published a detailed account based on records obtained from the El Paso Police Department. Those records showed that Nanos, whose publicly posted resume stated he served with El Paso PD until 1984, had in fact resigned from that department in 1982, 2 years earlier. Not voluntarily, but in lieu of termination. Over 6 years with El Paso PD, he had accumulated 26 disciplinary allegations, including excessive force, a shot fired, off-duty gambling, tardiness, and insubordination. He spent a total of 37 days suspended across that period. The reasons officially recorded for his 1982 departure were insubordination and consistent inefficiency. The story did not end there. In a sworn deposition taken in December 2025 as part of a lawsuit filed by Deputy Union President Aaron Cross, Nanos was asked directly whether he had ever been suspended during his law enforcement career. He answered no. El Paso Police Department employment records show he was suspended 8 times. Pima County Supervisor Matt Hines, a fellow Democrat, described the situation to the Arizona Republic as Nanos perpetrating a fraud upon the residents of Pima County for 4 decades. Hines said the deposition answer would be disqualifying for any county employee, and especially for one in law enforcement, and warned that every case Nanos had ever contributed to could potentially need to be reopened. The Pima County Sheriff's Department characterized the resume errors as administrative and clerical in nature, not intended to mislead. They updated the resume. The department did not address the deposition answer. Nanos initially responded to the Republic's reporter with emails that said, "Good luck with your hit piece." He later addressed the El Paso period in the KVOI radio interview, describing it as a very colorful career and saying that the life experiences of those years shape who he is today. The recall effort was formally filed on March 12th with the Pima County Elections Department. Daniel Gutierrez, a Republican candidate for Arizona's 7th Congressional District, submitted the application, triggering a 120-day window to collect at least 122,211 valid signatures, 25% of the total votes cast in Nanos's 2024 re-election, to qualify a recall measure for the ballot. Gutierrez described Nanos's handling of the Guthrie case as embarrassing across the board and told the New York Post that the resume and deposition revelations were the final straw. He enlisted 500 volunteers with a stated goal of reaching the signature threshold within 60 days rather than the full 120. Nanos responded through his office. "We are aware of the recall, and it is the right of the people. We will always honor the will of the people, and that is what makes democracy." In the radio interview, he went further, turning the rhetorical tables on Gutierrez by noting that the recall organizer himself served nearly 13 years in prison on drug charges before getting sober, and saying, "We all have pasts, but you don't live in your past. You learn from it, and you move on." What does Nanos actually believe about the case? In the March 20th KVOI interview, asked whether he believed investigators would solve it, he said, "I believe we will, yes. I have full faith in my team's ability. There is just a lot going on." When asked the cold case question directly, he gave the three-word answer that Parade headlined: "Not even close." And then he drew the comparison that communicates most clearly how he frames the scale and patience this investigation may require. He said the Guthrie case is unlike anything Tucson has seen in years. The closest parallel he could identify was the abduction of Isabel Celis, a 6-year-old girl taken from her bedroom in her family's Tucson home in the early morning hours of April 21, 2012. Her disappearance stunned the city and drew national attention, with her fate unknown for 5 years. In 2017, Christopher Clements, a convicted sex offender already in custody on unrelated charges, told FBI agents he could lead investigators to Celis's remains in a desert area near Avra Valley in exchange for having unrelated charges dropped. He directed them to the location. Her body was found. He was arrested. The first trial in the Celis murder case ended in a hung jury and mistrial in 2023. A retrial began in February 2024. On February 29, 2024, a Pima County Superior Court jury convicted Clements of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and second-degree burglary in connection with Isabel's death. He was sentenced to natural life in prison on April 10, 2024. From the night Isabel Celis disappeared to the day Christopher Clements was sentenced, 12 years. Nanos's exact words when he drew the parallel: "It took 10 years to get a resolution on that." I hope that is not the case here. But I hope the public and community understand that we are working it hard, and we are working it with some really good quality teams. That invocation is not a concession. It is a statement about precedent and process. Pima County has resolved a complex, evidence-intensive abduction case before, one that required sustained commitment over a decade. The case did not go cold. It took years, but it arrived at a verdict. Nanos is pointing to that institutional memory as a form of credibility, not a forecast of duration, but a demonstration of what this department, with these federal partners, has already done. Outside Nancy's home in the Catalina foothills, a growing memorial has developed over the weeks of the investigation. Yellow ribbons, matching the color of the desert wildflowers native to that landscape, dot neighbors' mailboxes and cacti along the surrounding streets. At the local NBC station in Tucson, approximately 5 miles from Nancy's residence, a large banner reading "Bring Her Home" carries handwritten messages from well beyond Pima County, from Bend, Oregon, from New York City, from Scotland, from Mexico. A local streamer named Damian Enderly had been live streaming daily from outside the Guthrie property since the earliest days of the investigation, accumulating thousands of viewers per session, and was still doing so on day 44 when CNN reported on his presence. Neighbor David Holter, who has lived about a mile from the property for decades, told CNN that a stolen suitcase and a stolen bicycle were the only crimes he could recall in the Catalina foothills in all the years he had lived there. That is the neighborhood into which this case arrived, and it is the neighborhood the community is still hoping Nancy Guthrie will be returned to. The question of where this investigation goes from here depends on which of three paths produces a result first, and which path the evidence is actually on. The investigation, as this documentary has laid it out chapter by chapter, comes down to three active strands. The DNA recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home is still being processed through forensic genetic genealogy. The witness canvas in the Catalina foothills is still expanding with each week that passes, and the question of whether someone who was physically present in that neighborhood in January 2026, a contractor, a service worker, a neighbor, a person who drove through at the wrong time to be innocent of noticing something, will eventually pick up the phone and call the FBI. Each of those strands represents a distinct path to resolution, and depending on which one produces a result first, the story of this investigation ends very differently. The first path is the most technically direct. Forensic genetic genealogy produces a familial match in a commercial ancestry database, Ancestry DNA, and one of the others that individuals voluntarily submit their DNA to. Investigators identify a cluster of relatives who share partial genetic markers with the unknown DNA recovered from inside Nancy's home. They work backwards through the family tree, combining genealogical research with everything they already know: the physical profile from the doorbell footage, the Catalina foothills geography, the pre-offense reconnaissance pattern established by the three key dates. They narrow from a family cluster to a set of individual candidates. They investigate each independently. One of them is the person who left that DNA at Nancy's property. An arrest follows. This is the path that identified the Golden State Killer after more than 4 decades of searching. It is the path that led to Brian Kohberger in the University of Idaho murders. From the first genealogical match to a named suspect in approximately 6 weeks. The precedents confirm that the process works, and works even when the suspect has no prior criminal record and no entry in any law enforcement database. It only needs a relative who voluntarily participated in a commercial ancestry platform. The limitation is time and the quality of the sample. The DNA recovered at Nancy's home is a mixture, potentially involving more than one contributor. C.C. Moore, chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, described the challenge plainly. The more people you get in that DNA sample, the harder it is to isolate one person's profile out of it. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Lance Lysing told CBS News the process may produce multiple candidates from the same family, each requiring independent investigation. Sheriff Nanos has said the analytical challenges might resolve in a matter of weeks, months, or possibly a year. Lysing also offered a reading of the current silence that captures both the caution and the hope. I would like to be hopeful that, and I am sure the family is incredibly hopeful, that the silence is because they are on to something. They just need to investigate further. The second path depends not on a laboratory, but on a human being. Someone who was physically present in or near the Catalina foothills in January 2026 contacts the FBI with information they may not yet fully realize is relevant. They saw a vehicle, a face from the footage that they now recognize, a pattern of behavior they observed without understanding its significance at the time. A contractor working down the street that week on one of the active construction sites who saw something at an unusual hour. a conversation that felt odd but not alarming. That single piece of information, cross-referenced with the forensic evidence investigators already hold, connects to a specific person. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer has been consistent throughout the investigation in her assessment that this case is far from stalled behind the scenes. She told Newsweek directly, "Nancy's case is the polar opposite of a cold case." She described it as a red-hot case with agents, analysts, Pima County Sheriff's officers, and other law enforcement working on all the actionable leads. In posts on X, she wrote, "Just because we don't see what the FBI is investigating, I assure you they are drinking from a fire hose with more investigative leads than most cases ever have." She added, "Anyone reporting that Nancy's case is cold has no idea what that term means and has never worked a day of law enforcement in their life." Coffindaffer separately identified the suspect's visible physical features: his eyebrows, his apparent mustache, his body proportions, the way he carries himself in the video clips, as the #1 actionable lead in the case. She said she has strong belief that someone in the public recognizes who that person is from the footage. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell on The Megyn Kelly Show in mid-March described her own read of where the investigation stands. "Those investigators know so much more than we do, and they are on to something. They are on to something big. They just may be having a hard time proving it." The third path is the one no one in the investigation wants to name. The DNA analysis is technically unresolvable. The mixture is too complex. The genealogical search produces no usable familial match, or the sample degrades before a candidate can be identified. The witness does not emerge. No one comes forward with the vehicle, the face, the detail, the conversation. The footage is not sufficient on its own to identify the suspect. The investigation stays formally open. The task force stays technically active. The tip line stays live, but no public breakthrough comes. Leasing's caution, stated plainly to CBS News, is the most honest account of what prolonged investigative silence without movement actually means. It becomes much harder to keep the investigation going, keep it current, and fight for new leads. This is the scenario the Guthrie family's sustained public appeals are specifically built to prevent. Every statement released, every reward announcement, every time Savannah speaks directly to the public and to the Tucson community, each one is designed to keep the case in front of the population most likely to hold the missing piece, to prevent the news cycle from moving on, to keep pressure on anyone who might know something and has not yet decided to act on it. Where the case actually stands right now, every confirmed fact, the family's own words, and the precise status of the investigation on this day is what follows. Today is March 24th, 2026. It is day 52. Here is everything that is confirmed. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, was last seen on the evening of January 31st, 2026, when Tommaso Cioni drove her home from a family dinner and waited until the garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. She was reported missing the following day, February 1st, after failing to appear for her weekly virtual church service. Her blood, confirmed by forensic DNA testing, was found on the front porch. A law enforcement source told CBS News that blood was also found inside the house. The Nest doorbell camera had been physically removed from its mounting. Her phone, her medication, her wallet, and her keys were all found inside, undisturbed. Sheriff Nanos has stated publicly that investigators believe the crime was targeted and that they believe they know why her home was chosen. He has said he personally believes Nancy is still alive. A masked male suspect was captured on doorbell footage on at least 2 separate occasions. He is described by the FBI as male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build, armed with a handgun in a waist holster and carrying a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack sold exclusively at Walmart. The footage was recovered through 8 days of technical collaboration between the FBI and Google's engineers, from residual data in Google's back-end infrastructure. Unknown male DNA was recovered from inside Nancy's property. It does not belong to Nancy and does not match anyone in her known contacts. It is a mixture and is currently being processed through forensic genetic genealogy at a private laboratory in Florida. All family members and their spouses have been cleared as suspects. All passed polygraph tests. The Pima County Sheriff's Department stated officially, "The Guthrie family are victims, plain and simple. No arrests have been made. No suspect has been publicly named. The combined reward stands at $1,202,500. $1 million from the Guthrie family, payable only for her recovery, $100,000 from the FBI, and $102,500 from 88 Crime, the Pima County and Tucson affiliate of Crime Stoppers, which received a $100,000 anonymous donation in February. Every dollar of it remains unclaimed. Cadaver dogs have been stood down from active deployment. The investigation is formally being conducted under the presumption that Nancy Guthrie is still alive. A violent crimes task force of 20 to 24 personnel, roughly half from the Pima County Sheriff's Department and half from the FBI's Phoenix Division, remains active and fully dedicated to this case. On Saturday, March 21st, the Guthrie family released their most recent public statement during the KVOA News 4 Tucson special broadcast titled "Bring Her Home: The Disappearance of Nancy Guthrie." Savannah shared it on her Instagram account the following morning, writing that someone knows how to find their mom and bring her home. The statement read, in part, "We are deeply grateful for the outpouring from neighbors, friends, and the people of Tucson. We are all family now. We continue to believe it is Tucsonans and the greater Southern Arizona community that hold the key to finding resolution in this case. Someone knows something. It is possible a member of this community has information they do not even realize is significant. We hope people search their memories, especially around the key timelines of January 31st and the early morning hours of February 1st, as well as the late evening of January 11th. Please consult camera footage, journal notes, text messages, observations, or conversations that, in retrospect, may hold significance. No detail is too small. It may be the key." The statement then continued, "We miss our mom with every breath, and we cannot be in peace until she is home. We cannot grieve. We can only ache and wonder. Our focus is solely on finding her and bringing her home. We want to celebrate her beautiful and courageous life, but we cannot do that until she is brought to a final place of rest. Thank you for continuing to pray without ceasing." The statement was signed, the Guthrie family, Cameron and Christine, Annie and Tommaso, Savannah and Michael. The 3 dates the family flagged as key, the late evening of January 11th, the full day of January 31st, and the early morning hours of February 1st. Those are the windows during which investigators believe the suspect was present in or around Nancy's neighborhood. Those are the windows during which someone may have seen something they have not yet reported. On March 5th, Savannah visited the Today Show studio at 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York for the first time since her mother disappeared on February 1st. She did not appear on air. She came to be with her colleagues, to thank them, to receive the love of a team that had been holding space for her through 52 days of uncertainty. Meteorologist Dylan Dreyer led the entire studio team in a spontaneous prayer, standing together behind the anchor desk, holding hands. Dreyer later described what she said in that prayer. "We are here, holding hands as a family, in a place where we don't understand why this is happening. It is not too bold to ask God for the biggest miracles every day." Al Roker told viewers the next morning, "We needed to see her as much as she needed to see us." Former co-anchor Hoda Kotb, who had returned from her leave of absence specifically to fill Savannah's seat, was visibly in tears. Savannah told her colleagues, "I wanted you to know that I'm still standing, and I still have hope, and I'm still me. And I don't know what version of me that will be, but it will be. I'm holding on to my faith. I still believe. And as my mom would say, where else would I go?" She told them she had every intention of coming back. She said, "I don't know how to come back, but I don't know how not to. You're my family, and I would like to try." Jenna Bush Hager told viewers that Savannah had said she has the intention to return to the show, even though it feels like the hardest thing to do. That the studio is also her home, and where she feels so loved. On March 2nd, Savannah had visited Nancy's home in the Catalina foothills with Annie and Tommaso. They placed yellow flowers next to the growing memorial at the edge of the property. Savannah posted to Instagram, "We feel the love and prayers from our neighbors, from the Tucson community, and from around the country. Please don't stop hoping with us." Nancy Guthrie has been gone for 52 days. Her medication is still inside her house. Her family is still waiting. The person or people who know what happened have not been identified. The DNA is still being processed. The neighborhood canvas is still expanding. The task force is still working. Someone in Tucson, in southern Arizona, possibly watching this right now, may have seen something on January 11th, January 24th, or the night of January 31st that they do not yet realize matters. A vehicle moving too slowly. A face that now matches the footage. A contractor who was on a site nearby that week. A pattern of behavior that registered as unusual at the time and was then put away. If that is you, call the FBI. You do not have to be certain. That is not your job. Make the call. Let investigators decide. The tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. 1-800-2255-324. Tips can also be submitted at tips.fbi.gov. The Pima County Sheriff's Department can be reached at 5203-514-900. Anonymous tips go through 88-CRIME at 5208-827-463. The combined reward of $1,202,500 is unclaimed. It will be paid for information that leads to Nancy's recovery or to the arrest and conviction of anyone responsible. Share this documentary. Every person who watches it is another set of eyes on a case that still needs them. And for everyone watching on Crime Justice's network, every confirmed development, every new lead, every time the evidence shifts, it will be on this channel the moment it is verified. For Nancy, for her family, for the standard that every case deserves this level of attention. We will see you in the next one.